Most leaders worry about the future, but my guest today argues that the biggest threat to your organization might actually be its past, or rather its inability to remember it. Studies show that corporate amnesia, the loss of institutional knowledge during leadership transitions and rapid growth, costs enterprises on an estimated $1 trillion in wasted productivity and failed successions. Joining me in the Steward Chair today is Jason Dressel, CEO of the History Factory. Jason has spent over 25 years helping the world's most iconic brands, from Southwest Airlines to Adobe, mine their heritage to drive future performance. Today, we're discussing the launch of their revolutionary AI Chronicle and why a leader's most profound obligation isn't just to grow the company, but to be the ultimate steward of its story. Jason, welcome to the show.
Jeff, thanks so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Thrilled to have you. Let's just jump right in, Jason. You joined History Factory in 1999. It was your dream role, right? And you became the CEO in 2021. So you've been stewarding this company even outside of your CEO role for a very long time. Now that you're in this chief steward role, how has your personal definition of stewardship changed from being a contributor to being the one entrusted with the firm's entire mission?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. I think, the distinction of being a founder versus being a CEO who is leading an organization that you didn't found is really quite different, right? And I was the first CEO of History Factory who was not our founder. I can talk in a very bold and non-humble way about the brilliance of the idea of History Factory, since I was not the one that came up with it. I joined the company 25 years after the company was founded. But very much in the context of the work that we do with our clients, we were really cognizant as we sort of took that mantle of leadership with myself and the other leaders on our executive team of how we really wanted to walk the walk and really demonstrate the work we do for clients and really do that for ourselves. And certainly, I feel a very strong sense of stewardship and leaving History Factory one day stronger than I found it. And I think that most leaders of organizations, and particularly CEOs, really feel that sense of accountability, that they want to leave the institution stronger than the institution that they joined.
I think that's such a great point. And so whether you founded it or you inherited it, you're a custodian for the time being. And do you recall kind of the earliest memory of first thinking that that was a possibility, that you would maybe become the CEO and non-founder of the business? And how did that feel at the time?
Yeah, it was never something that I focused on too specifically. I really focused on, doing the work. One of the interesting things about History Factory is the nature of our work is it's kind of like a real world kind of MBA. You're learning about the history of all these incredible organizations. You're getting to learn about leaders of companies at, organizations like a Southwest or a Bechtel. And it's an incredible experience for those of us who have the privilege to work there. And so certainly, working there for a long time and going through a number of different experiences that we had, whether that was making that transition from a very founder entrepreneurial driven culture to a more scalable professional services firm, or working through, challenges during 9/11 or the Great Recession or COVID, having those kinds of experiences of the challenges that an organization addresses, both in terms of external factors as well as internal factors. It was always interesting and continues to be interesting in terms of being able to sort of look at ourselves in the context of sort of, the kind of algorithm of organizational life cycle, and seeing what our clients are going through and being able to apply a little bit of that to ourselves.
I think it's what's really neat about just your tenure and the evolution of your leadership responsibility and role there today, and also the real world MBA that you mentioned. I feel that way the same too here on the Steward Chair, bringing on all these phenomenal CEOs, presidents, and founders, and what we get to learn. I mean, I'm an avid reader, but I feel like it's a great gig, and I've been able to apply it into my leadership and lessons learned and the way in which we're thinking about our business. What a great gift that is that you have. In our prior conversations, you mentioned that even the most successful organizations eventually risk losing their way. Why is it that scale and success often leads to this strategic drift, or what some call corporate amnesia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a number of things, right? It's when you look at, as I mentioned before, there's an algorithm, and there's a lot of research and different work in this space, right, about organizational life cycles and the stages that organizations take. And as I mentioned before, in the nature of our work, we see that up front every day. And no organization has the same journey, but there's certainly consistency that you see across organizations. And typically you obviously have the founding era. It may be a visionary entrepreneur. It's someone who has either created a completely new market or new white space, or is a disruptor and has been able to find a new way to create and unlock value in a specific market or industry. And it might be the founding era, or oftentimes it might even be the next generation that then kind of, figures out a way to hyperscale that. And then, it's sometime in the organization's life cycle, if they're fortunate enough, maybe they get fat and happy, right? And it might be they become a victim of their own success and they become more bureaucratic. It might be that they get disrupted. But whatever the reason, they tend to then have a period where they essentially have lost their mojo, and they need to get it back. And there's been a lot of work recently on that. I think that there's a renewed or sort of hyper focus on that right now, because when you look at, just as an example, the Fortune 500 and the companies that are generating the most value in the S&P 500, historically for decades, those tended to be older companies that had endured, the General Electrics, the General Mills, right? These were sort of the companies that, if you're maybe part of our generation, Jeff, we kind of grew up, seeing as these companies, IBM, companies that had demonstrated the ability to be successful and transition from generation to generation. You now have a lot of companies that are ostensibly generating, a disproportionate amount of the value in the market. And these companies haven't yet necessarily demonstrated that they are truly built to last, for 100 years. They're either in, or they are still sort of performing off of a lot of the success and IP that was put in place during their founding era. So I think right now there's a lot of focus on that kind of facet or aspect of companies. And particularly, obviously, when you look at what's happening with AI, all organizations are having to adapt to this disruptive technology and take advantage of it, very much like the way companies had to adapt in the 90s and early 2000s with the internet. And, some companies are going to adapt to that and be more successful than others.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And it's such a great insight that you have to be able to look back, but see the shift that's occurred through this really innovative period we've been in since the 2000s, and all these SaaS companies and technology companies that are now generating billions and billions of market cap, and how outsized they are comparatively to some of those companies of old. And, they're still around, but it does seem like the S&P and the dominant forces are those companies that have been around for a decade or 20 years or maybe even less in some cases. Is that what you're kind of seeing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're quite that young, right? But, it's that balance again of, the companies that are going to demonstrate that they're built to last. I mean, I think when you look at the scale that a lot of these companies have had, right? I mean, you look at an Amazon and you can see even through the sort of historical context how a company like Amazon is very much sort of, the 21st century kind of version of what, a Sears and then later what a Walmart is. And of course, Walmart is a company that, demonstrated their ability to shift during that disruption. Sears, not so much. And so you can look at some of these companies in the same industry over the last, 30, 40 years, and you can see those that managed to pivot and respond versus those that didn't. But I do think it's interesting because back to sort of the core of your question and your point, it's the distinction of companies that are going to be able to balance being able to change and being able to adapt and be agile, but at the same time not lose sight of the fact that they have a very special sauce and they need to protect that, right? And so I don't know when this will air, but we're talking about, that we're talking in the same week that, Disney's brought in a new CEO. It's someone that they're bringing in who is, Disney's kind of tradition is to transition with leaders who are already part of the culture in the organization. And we'll see how he performs, obviously, but certainly everything I've read of Josh, he's someone who really understands, that sort of special sauce of Disney. He points back often to the document that really became what was known as the synergy map that Walt Disney himself sketched in 1957. And so, in a leader like that, you have someone who is being charged with being able to really scale the business and adapt to a lot of these new technologies and leverage the IP. But he understands, at least from everything we've seen, that the superpower of Disney is the core of their creativity, their imagination, their ability to create stories that transcend time and place. And then to be able to obviously, scale that IP across a lot of different platforms and channels. So that's an example, right, of what we're talking about when we talk about companies needing to balance kind of the past and the future and not lose sight of, what their superpower is.
So I love it. It's such a delicate balance, like seeing the past, looking at the future, being innovative. And it's such a disruptive time with AI that you brought in. One of my clients, we've been helping them with their company-wide all hands for the last 5 years and really elevating that moment for storytelling and connection and transparency by its leadership and casting vision and how, AI is disrupting. But one of the events that they recently did, their external stakeholders, it was a big kind of sales event, said this company feels like they just started 2 years ago because they're innovating so much and they're doing this, and they celebrated that in the all hands meeting. So this founder's mindset is an important thing. But what is that kind of anchor that like kind of keeps the drift, or at least keeps it in the center of that delicate balance, would you say?
Well, to your point, I'm really good at being able to talk about others' brilliance, right? So I mentioned History Factory's founder Bruce Weindrich and the genius of the idea behind History Factory. But there's been some work that was done maybe about a decade ago by Bain. It's branded as the founder's mentality, and essentially the short version of that work, which is directly relevant to your question, Jeff, is that essentially what they studied through a longitudinal study was that companies that are run by founders, by and large, outperform those that aren't. Now, again, if you're Disney, you don't have the luxury of bringing Walt back, right? But the point that they were making is not that, and the point of their research and their work around this is not that founders are inherently better leaders than non-founders, and indeed sometimes it may be the opposite. But the founders essentially have a core set of attributes, and so they tend to have a core set of sort of principles and qualities that are very much focused on being obsessive about entrepreneur, obsessive about customer service and the front line, and other characteristics that essentially, if companies can stay aligned to, they have at least according to Bain's theory, they have a better likelihood of being able to sustain their performance longer. And so I think to the core of your question, it's really about, as I mentioned before, it's about staying tethered to what makes you uniquely you. When you see a lot of companies, particularly large companies, that have undergone a period of underperforming, it's typically something that's happened where they've lost sight of what made them special. They've lost that sense of their core. They've become distracted, either because they've become so successful that suddenly they're investing in these other areas and have kind of taken their eye off the ball, or they've been disrupted and they haven't managed to transition through that period of disruption by protecting what their kind of core superpower is.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I also thought when you said that they can't bring Walt Disney back, my thought was not yet, right? Like maybe there is an AI application for that to, bring back the founder if that was a good story. But I want to talk about the difficult parts of history and why transparency is such a leadership requirement. Because every century, old companies have their shadows and chapters which they maybe prefer to forget. And you said before that hiding history makes a leader look a little untrustworthy and can sometimes be to their detriment. So how does a steward leader handle an uncomfortable heritage without erasing it? And we could call it what it is. So many people call it like cancel culture or whatever, but let's talk about it as like really historical preservation, good, bad, and the ugly. Why is that so important?
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at, Jeff, is that there's the proverbial skeletons in the closet. And so, organizations that are hypersensitive to moments in their life cycle where they've had an experience or conducted themselves or had people in the organization that have essentially been part of acts that, as we define it at History Factory, are inconsistent with today's ethics and standards. And not to sound like a classic, management consultant, but the circumstances kind of depend, right, on exactly what we're talking about. There's a big difference in, if you're talking about an organization that, from an institutional perspective was involved in, illegal activity, where they were maybe not complying with, regulatory compliance or something like that, compared to an organization that, has, advertising from its past that's now embarrassing because it's out of step with today's culture, right? So the first issue there is really understanding what is it that we're talking about with respect to the areas of sensitivity. The second issue, though, to your point, is then how do you contextualize that? How do you communicate that? And certainly our point of view is that ignoring it, whitewashing it, any of those kinds of steps, particularly in the day and age that we live in, is not your best foot forward. You need to own it and acknowledge whatever's happened in the history of your organization, whether that happened last week or 50 years ago. But I think where organizations often kind of get hung up on this is that they actually tend to be hypersensitive about the wrong things. If you're talking about, employees, consumers, and other constituencies, there's a level of innate understanding. If you're a 100-year-old legacy company that, at any given time over the course of your history, you're going to be a reflection of the society in which you lived. And oftentimes there's a lot of sensitivity now on the part of leaders to, specific, iconography or past actions that may, position the organization as, as being discriminatory. But typically, the issues that we see and from the research we've done, the issues where organizations need to be far more sensitive is when they have actions that reflect on sort of their core kind of sort of DNA and culture. So for instance, if you're a company or brand that, is strongly aligned with political issues, kind of on, sort of whether it's the extreme left or the extreme right, if you have a history of those kinds of positions, constituencies tend to associate those more with kind of who you are, as opposed to past actions that they see as more just reflective and kind of a mirror of society at any given time in history.
That's really good. Yeah, good context. I also love how you talk about heritage as something that's particularly useful in all organizational functions, such as marketing, comms, business development, strategy, innovation, legal, and compliance. It really does help tell the full story. But what is the difference? I've seen so many, say, company stories that are sometimes used and they seem kind of for shallow marketing versus one that uses it for authentic storytelling. Like, how do you kind of tell the difference? And as you're talking to clients, like, how are you telling them to tap into their history, their heritage authentically to use for storytelling and sharing their brand externally?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if you think about the organizations we work with, they tend to be large enterprises, big brands. Their audiences are massive. They're like nation states, right? And so oftentimes we think about it almost in the context of how we think about history in our own country, right? And so if we're thinking about the United States as a brand, and the only thing that we can talk about when we talk about the history of the United States is we were founded in 1776. You're not getting a lot out of that, right? And that's kind of what a lot of organizations will do. They'll kind of land on this like sort of, well, we've been around for 100 years, so that's impressive, right? And not necessarily, especially obviously if you're a customer or a partner or an employee in Europe or in Asia. They're like, you just got here, and so again, it's that context of how do you tell your story? The way we think about your history and your heritage is it's your experience, right? It's just like you and I talking. If I ask you where you're from, and you're like, well, I'm not really sure, Jason, and I say, well, when did you graduate from school? And you're like, it's complicated. It's like, I'm not going to trust you very much. And so what we're helping our clients do is have really confident and accurate answers to those kinds of questions in terms of who they are, where they come from, how they've changed over time, and how they tell those stories. And again, going back to kind of the analogy of, our own country and our own history, it's going to be different, obviously, in the eye of the beholder. Everyone's going to have their different perspective on how they interpret, the history of our country. But that starts with actually having the understanding of the history itself, right? And so if the only thing about, the United States is we were founded in 1776, we had this, really big Civil War thing that happened, and then there was this World War II thing happened, and, now, we're here. That doesn't give you a very deep and rich and contextual understanding of who we are as an enterprise, right? And so that's really what we're doing with the work we do every day is we're giving our organizations the understanding in a very authentic and deep way of who they are, where they've come from, so that they can use that understanding to be stronger as they move forward.
Fascinating. And for me, I see it at the enterprise level of being able to stay true to those roots and tell a better story. And I love how you equate that to trust building and how telling that story ties into that strategy and how you connect with your stakeholders. I found that even as a small business owner and 4.5 years in, that anytime I tell the origin story and the founding and how we got to where we are today, and the things that happen, that really resonates with prospective customers, and I think it's established a lot more close relationships and trusted relationships as a result. So I've seen that firsthand, and it's a good reminder to me, and it's a good reminder, I hope, to all of our chief stewards listening, that telling their story and being good at it and repeating that is actually a really good thing.
Well, and I think to your point, it's also how you tell the story. I think one of the things we talk a lot with our clients about is that you don't have to, it's not just telling the story, it's how you tell the story for different contexts, right? So if you're a leader and you're thinking about how you tell your story to an investor, that's going to be different than how you may talk to your employees. That may be different to how you talk to potential talent. Again, a lot of times what you see with organizations is the folks inside the company, they know it's kind of like what I just said about sort of like our country. They know like 5 things. They're like, yeah, I know it was founded and there was this thing that happened, and oh my gosh, there's the story of the fire, and that sounds like that was really bad, and then a bunch of other stuff happened, and then we did this really cool product thing, and then we built this big building, and now we're here. And it's like, Well, you can tell those stories in a very different way. It's like, so, the fire story may be told very differently if you're, telling it as a story of resilience to leaders versus telling it as a, story of adaptability, to a different audience. So it's not only having a sort of broader kind of, portfolio of stories, but also having a broader kind of, portfolio of the characters in those stories and different angles you take to those stories based on who your audience is and what your message is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to shift to the AI launch and the more technical side of stewardship. So we talked a little bit about the cost of forgetting, being able to tell your story, and you've used AI as a truth engine. I think it's so amazing what you're doing. So the platform is called Chronicle. Could you tell our listeners about what it is and how it kind of operates in this era of deep fakes, hallucinations, and how you kind of operate to make sure that it's bringing great historical evidence and all this great context to companies?
Absolutely. We're so excited about Jeff. It's awesome. First of all, History Factory, we've been around for almost 50 years. And so this is not our first rodeo with technology. We have actually a long legacy of inventing and creating technology in our space, going back to even the 80s. We were really early adopters with leveraging technology, certainly during the internet, and we've really been building tools ever since. And Chronicle is truly sort of a embodiment of our vision to empower the world's best enterprises to get infinite use out of their history to drive their missions forward. And it's just a really cool tool. And to be specific, it is a AI platform that enables its users to really get the amazing benefits that we all see and recognize and enjoy in terms of those of us that are using AI every day, which I assume is going to be most of our listeners. But as you noted, I think we all have a pretty good general understanding right now of where AI falls woefully short. It's not great at context. It's not great at accuracy. It's not great at being authentic. We all, have had that experience where you get a result and it sounds like it's basically just, the biggest BSer on the planet. And Chronicle is really built to solve for all of those things. So it's a hybrid intelligence where we have essentially built a technology platform using our expertise and using the resources of an organization so that everything that's coming out of that platform is grounded in verified materials. So it's closed loop, meaning that it's not just going out to the internet and just scraping up a bunch of data. It's content that we have handcrafted and curated and put into the platform. But importantly, it's also by no means as simple as, when you're working on a project and you just create a custom GPT or a custom gem and just, drop 25, files into it. It's a platform where we've trained the tool to essentially perform as a thought partner. It will tell you when it doesn't know answers. It will double check and look for nuance in what it's giving you. But it's really grounded in the history or specific kind of experience of whatever it's been trained to do. And through the methodology that we've created, it's especially good at making sure that the data and information that we're putting into the platform is being read accurately so that the results that you get are accurate. And there's a couple of really cool things about that. So as an example, if you're loading into it all of your annual reports and maybe all of your newsletters, both digital newsletters or items that have been ripped off the internet, as well as maybe older analog materials that your organization may have had decades ago. A lot of that content is essentially in formats that may be really complicated for just a standard AI to be able to read. It might be sidebars, it might be, graphs and charts. And so essentially what we've done with our methodology is we're basically unpacking all of that data so that it's being read accurately, because that's where a lot of the hallucination happens. A lot of folks understand the AI hallucinates. They don't understand why it hallucinates. And part of the reason why is because the sort of regular AI tools are doing this very quick kind of conversion scan of information. And they're just not catching the details, right? And obviously, if you're, reading a chart and you're only reading half of the data accurately, that's going to result in inaccurate results. It's kind of garbage in, garbage out. So that's a big part of Chronicle. The other thing that's really great about it is, in addition to just, me being able to tell you that that's what it does, users can actually see that for themselves. They can actually click on the actual sources and they can find the actual data, the actual information. They can visually look at it themselves. They can copy it. So it's amazing. It really is just a incredible tool that we're so excited. Our clients that initially have been on it over the last few months have been raving about it. They've talked about how they've been able to find things that their other internal AI tools haven't been able to find. They've been able to take tasks that took days and get them done within minutes. So again, it's really combining sort of the superpowers that we see with AI with offsetting a lot of the things about AI right now that are falling short.
Well, I can see why you're super excited. It sounds amazing. And I saw that Bechtel, who you mentioned earlier, 128-year-old engineering company, their legacy communications manager said that it's fundamentally changed how they interact with their institutional knowledge. And it's more than a search tool. It's a partner that gives us a running start on any task. We rely on it because it's inherently trustworthy. It provides a clear trail back to the original source and crucially knows its own limits. That honesty allows our team to work with total confidence. What a great statement from a 128-year-old company that's probably had a ton of data to suss through in order to unlock those types of things for them.
Yeah, I mean, Bechtel's an incredible partner. If your listeners are not familiar with Bechtel, or your audience is not familiar with Bechtel, it's one of the world's largest construction engineering firms. It's a company that built out huge portions of the American West and the Middle East. They work on massive projects of scale. They are trusted by huge countries and municipalities to build power plants and bridges and tunnels and all kinds of infrastructure. And their ability as a massive professional services firm to be able to obviously access their organizational memory and to talk about their experience is essential to their partnerships and to their leadership in the industry. And so we have an enormous amount of pride in the work that we do with them in that capacity. We've worked with them for many years, as I said, and they've been really, really thrilled with their use of Chronicle.
Well, congratulations on the launch. It's super exciting, and the work you do is fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but we're coming up on time. So as we think about talking to our chief stewards who listen to this show, these are people that are running their businesses today or aspire to run a business tomorrow. If you could ensure one principle of stewardship is passed down to that next generation of leaders, those who are currently managing these kind of born digital companies, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what we were talking about before, Jeff, which is I think that right now it's going to be really, really important that organizations understand what their superpower is. What is it that your organization does that's made it successful and has gotten you to this point? What value are you offering to society and to your market? And how are you going to continue to do that in this age of transformation? I mean, the reality is when we talk about us going through a great period of change, when are we not, right? I mean, it feels really fast right now because of what's happening with AI. But when does it not feel, like we're going through a massive period of change and transformation? That is the constant. And I think as it just continues to get maybe more chaotic and more complex, you really need to offset that with a sense of simplicity of, what is the core kind of center of your chessboard, and what is your organization's core superpower, and really kind of lean into that. And I think to your point, both for the long term as a steward, that's really important. But I think that's also really important as you navigate this era of AI. Because one of the things that we learned early on, and from some of the guidance that we got from CTOs, from some of our clients, was that the best AI that's being built is not necessarily going to be built by the big tech firms. Some of those companies that we were talking about that are dominating the S&P right now. It's going to be built by companies that are forging and leveraging the technology and the tools that they are building, and then applying them in their area of subject matter and technical expertise, right? And that's what we've done with Chronicle, is we're essentially, leveraging a lot of the capabilities from the Googles and Anthropics of the world. And then we're applying it where our people have, deep experience and deep expertise to build tools that are going to solve problems for our clients. And so that would be my advice, both in the short term and the long term, for leaders, is to really think hard and be really, really clear-eyed about, what your unique value is and how you can leverage these new opportunities with AI, and not lose sight of that over the long term.
Amazing wisdom, Jason. Thank you for coming on the Steward Chair. What a gift it was.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
Wow. My sincere thanks to Jason for joining us today. I really felt like his insights on bridging the gap between a century of heritage and the future of AI, such a powerful example of the strategic value of long-term stewardship and heritage. So here is your steward's call. This is one key moment I think you can take away from the conversation and apply today. I think you should audit your institutional memory and discover your superpowers. It's a little bit of a two-pronged of what he said. Be clear-eyed about your unique value and your secret sauce. I feel like stewardship isn't just about moving forward. It's about ensuring that all the hard-won wisdom of your predecessors and all the history of your company isn't lost to what he called the corporate amnesia. So ask yourself, is the entire C-suite walking out tomorrow? And if they were, would your organization's truth stay behind, or would it walk out the door with them? So remember, a legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's the foundation you build for those who follow. So what you preserve today determines how clearly the next generation can lead tomorrow. If you found value in today's conversation, please follow the Steward Chair wherever you get your podcasts, and share this episode with a leader you respect. A final thank you to our incredible team, our executive producers, Quentin and Thomas, and our managing editor, Daniel. They really are the true stewards behind this show, and I'm your host and researcher, Jeff Bond. And with that, go and be a leader worth following.